Hello, we're back for chapter 3. This chapter is called In the Cook Shack. Bo stood in a slash of cool sunlight on a low stool by the pastry table. The pastry table was pushed up against the side wall of the cook shack. The wall was full of windows. She could see the whole little sleeping town there, over the creek, the dirty snow half thawed, mud thick in the paths. The miners got up long before anyone else was awake in town. She was cutting the biscuits. Her tongue was sticking out because you had to concentrate on biscuits. There were 17 men to cook for, so that meant 60 biscuits to cut. That was her job every morning. When she was younger, Jack would mix the dough and roll them out for her, but now she was 5 and old enough to roll them out by herself. Jack said biscuits were the most important thing a cook made, and that you could tell right away what kind of cook you were dealing with when you saw his biscuits. They had to be flaky, ready to fall apart, almost golden brown on top. You must never twist the cutter, or else it wouldn't rise up at all. There were lots of other rules for making perfect biscuits, and Bo followed them all. She had taken on Jack's fussy ways, not Arvid's slapdash ways. She cut the last biscuit and put it carefully on the baking sheet. You had to put them just so, far enough apart that you wouldn't bump into each other when they got bigger in the oven. If they touched, the sides wouldn't be crispy the way good biscuits had to be. She wiped her hands on her apron and climbed off the stool. Jack was singing under his breath, a rumble from his broad chest, frying potatoes in an enormous cast-iron skillet. Frying potatoes made a good brown smell. She pulled at his apron. "Papa," she said, "they're ready." He smiled down at her. Just in time. He opened the huge oven door and a wave of heat poured into the room. The oven had to be very hot to make biscuits. He had to put the pan on exactly the right rack, not too high, not too low, and close the door. Bo waited anxiously until it was time to take the biscuits out of the oven, because you could never be sure what kind of job you'd done until you saw them all baked. Soon the kitchen was filled with good smells of biscuits. Jack took out the pan and set it on the side of the stove. Bo smiled. They were all standing tall, those biscuits, their flaky layers almost ready to tip over. Bo got a clean napkin from the drawer to line the tin of the wash basin they used for the biscuits. And then Jack slid the biscuits off the pan into the basin. She looked a question at him and he nodded. She ran to the porch outside the cookhouse door and stood on her tiptoes to reach the iron triangle that hung from the porch roof. It was her job to call the miners to breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You had to take the little rod that hung with the little triangle and bang it back and forth on the sides of the triangle. You couldn't just do it once. You had to clang away for a long enough time that all of the men in the bunkhouses would hear it, even if they were still asleep. She liked the noise the triangle made, bossy and loud. And now, in the spring, with the snow melting, it made an even bossier, louder sound. All the sounds seemed to be louder in the spring. You could hear things far away, even people chopping wood in the little town across the bridge. She ran inside the cook shack, banging the door, carefully gathered up the pastry cloth she'd used to cut the biscuits on. She took it outside and shook off the extra flour, trying to be careful that none of the flour blew back on her. She folded the cloth carefully again and put it in its place in the pantry drawer. She wiped off the rolling pin and put it away with the pastry cloth. That job was done. By the time the porch was full of miners, some of them bending over the basins of water on the long bench by the door, throwing water on their faces to wake up, and insulting each other. "Shove over," Carl complained to Swish-Wash George, and Peter growled at Dan. "You're getting more water on me than on yourself." Bo loved to listen to them carry on. They were a good-natured bunch, Jack said, but rowdy. Then the cook shack was filled with loudness of the men in their striped shirts and suspenders, their miners' boots noisy on the bare wood floor, and the clatter of the thick pottery. Gilliam took Bo's hand and pretended to dance her around the room, singing Casey Could Waltz with a Strawberry Blonde, because he always said that was the color of her hair. Well, strawberries were red, and her hair wasn't, so she didn't know why he said that. But Gilliam let her loose, and Patty pulled her braid. "Good morning, darlin'." Bo always got a little roughed up in the morning. There's a picture. They took their bowls and plates from the table against the wall and sat at the long, long table, which was covered with an oilcloth. Benches lined the sides of the table, and there was a chair for the boss at the head. Everyone had his own special place, though Bo didn't know how they'd decide it. "In England," said Lester, to no one particular, helping himself to a sausage, "the sausages are much fatter." "Yeah, but we put better meat in ours," said Johnny, which made everyone laugh. What everyone called them and what they called themselves was boys. "You boys move over," Dan said when Fritz and Andy were taking up too much room on the bench. The boys at Ballard Creek mined, people would say, even if they were all pretty old, and Peter was very, very old. They all had different ways of talking because they all came from different places. Bo was really good at pretending to talk like them. The boys would say, "Do Jack," and Bo would make her voice go all soft and slurry like Jack's. "Do Sandor," and then she'd talk like Sandor, who was from a country called Hungary, and the boys would laugh and slap their knees. "Could be on the stage," Johnny always said. Lester was the youngest, and Bo liked him very much. He had bright red hair, and his words bounced up and down. He said that was how they talked in London. There was a place in London where people put on shows and sang songs and told jokes. The music hall. Lester taught her songs he'd learned there. Bo's favorite music hall song was "Don't Go Into the Lion Cage Tonight," 'cause the lions look ferocious and may bite. It was about a circus lady who did tricks with lions. Bo knew it all the way through, and she and Lester would sing it together at the roadhouse if someone asked them to. Peter was the oldest miner. His eyes were pale blue and milky looking, and he had hands that had knotted veins all over them. But even if he was old, he was as strong as the other men. Peter liked rocks. "Rocks are the oldest thing on earth," he told her. "They've been here since the beginning, before any plants or animals, before oceans. They're billions of years old." Bo had looked hard at Peter's kind face to see how old that was. Billions must be terribly old, but she couldn't even imagine being 12 or 15, so how could she think of billions? She couldn't feel what big numbers meant. Peter taught Bo how to look for mica, the shiny stuff in rocks, and he would bring her any interesting rocks he found. Bo kept the rocks under the long table by the door in the Hills Brothers coffee can. Bo's favorite rock was called schist. A mica in schist was streaked with long, shining lines straight across the rock, scraped there when the rock was under the earth and was being squeezed and stretched. Peter complained about the rocks around the diggings. "Not much of interest," he said. "Other places in the world they have rocks full of crystals, sometimes bits of bugs or ferns from long ago, and some rocks that are made of nothing but ground-up shells. Those are the really interesting kinds of rocks." Bo wished she could see those rocks. The boys teased him about his rocks. "Only rocks I want to see is ones with gold in it," they would say. Of the 17, of course Arvard and Jack were the biggest. Nobody was as big as they were. Carl was almost as tall as Jack and Arvard, but he was skinny. And it would take 2 of his arms to make up one of Jack's, Bo thought. Andy and Patty were the shortest. Andy was square with stumpy legs, and Patty was just a flimsy little man. "A rag and a bone and a hank of hair" was what Jack called him when he was teasing him. Teasing was their favorite thing. They teased each other for being short. They teased Jack and Arvard for being tall. They teased each other about their accents. They teased Lester for his red hair. They teased Bo for being fussy like Jack. They teased Dan for eating fast. They teased Sandor for snoring. They teased everyone in Ballard Creek for everything. They never stopped. Jack had the table covered with good breakfast. Besides the potatoes and the biscuits, there were bowls of honey and butter, platters of bacon and sausage, scrambled eggs, a big bowl of oatmeal to eat with canned milk and brown sugar, the tall stacks of sourdough hotcakes Jack had been keeping warm in the oven. The boss liked to feed his crew well, because every day all they did was hard, back-breaking work. Not a slacker among them, the boss used to say. Arvid came banging through the cook shack door and took his place next to Bo at the end of the table. He was so big that when he sat on the bench, it sagged a little. He looked down at Bo. "I beat you here this morning," he said. "You were still snoring when I went to the shop." "I do not snore," said Bo. "That's you." The men passed around the plates and bowls of food and never stopped talking while they were eating. Jack said they were the talkingest bunch of men he'd ever worked with, except for Boss, that is. His name was Ed McKay, but no one ever called him that. They just called him Boss. The boss never said much. He looked quiet and calm, and when he had to talk, he said things in the shortest way possible. Bo ate her stack of hotcakes with lots of syrup and butter and one biscuit with honey and lots of potatoes and 2 pieces of bacon, and she was still hungry, so Arvid gave her one of his greasy sausages, which squeaked when she cut into it. She wasn't quite full yet, but she didn't want any oatmeal, so she and Arvid ate the last 2 biscuits, even though they were cold. Jack was proud of the amount Bo could put away. "Just like one of the men," he said. And when they were finished, Jack was pouring out their coffee. A little round Gintu burst in the door, slamming it against the wall like she always did. She came in every morning to help Jack with the dishes and peel potatoes and do piles of laundry in the washing shack. She was Eco and Sammy's grandmother, and she almost bounced, she was so full of energy, and when she laughed her eyes squinted into half moons. Gintu never learned to speak English, so she told Bo what she wanted to say. Bo had learned to speak Eskimo right along with English. Sometimes when the boys were teasing her or pulling her apron springs, Gintu told Bo to say naughty things to the miners. Bo knew she shouldn't say things like that in English, so Bo would just smile at Gintu and shake her head. When Bo was first learning to talk, the Eskimo children taught her all the swear words in Eskimo, and then would laugh until tears ran down their faces to see parents' mouths drop in such words coming from a little girl. Oscar was Bo's best friend. Oscar's mama, Clara, didn't think it was funny. She made the kids stop teaching Bo stuff. She told Bo not to say those words. Bo understood right away because Jack and Arvid had told her which of the English words she learned from the miners that she mustn't say. So she didn't say those words anymore when the grown-ups were listening. And when the grown-ups weren't listening, all the children in Ballard Creek used all the swear words they knew, of course. Bo could swear in Swedish, too, because that's what Arvid did. But Bo liked the Eskimo words the best, because they felt all ragged in her throat. After the boys had eaten their breakfast and Jack had poured their coffee, they lit up their pipes and the cook shack was filled with a hazy smoke and the good smell of their tobacco. And then it was time to start work. They scraped back their chairs and benches and stretched. Alex and Sandor put their round stomachs under their striped shirts. "Your sourdough are going to kill me, and that's a fact," Sandor said to Jack. They all said goodbye to Bo and piled their dishes on the table by the sink for Gintu to wash, saying teasing things to her in English. They told her that she was getting old, or that she better save a dance for them the next time she was down at the roadhouse. Gintu laughed at them, but she couldn't understand the words. She might have understood the meaning. Then it was Bo's job to take the butter and syrup and the other things on the table back to the pantry. After that, she must scrub the oilcloth that covered the long table. Jack kept a spotless kitchen, and by the time she'd finished the table, he'd swept and mopped the floor. He did this after every meal. The miners' boots were always filled of muck, especially now in the spring when the snow was melting. "Dirty floors make me feel like my face is dirty," he'd say. There was a big stack of dishes for Gintu to wash after every meal. Jack kept an eye on her to make sure she did it right. Gintu always put in so much soap that the bubbles floated away and fell in clumps on the floor, and sometimes she wouldn't get the water hot enough. The dishwashing water had to be very, very hot. The dishwashing water was very important. Cups and silverware had to be washed first. Jack had lots of rules about washing dishes, and Gintu pretty much broke all of them when he wasn't looking. Gintu was singing loudly while she slammed the plates into the dishpan. She was like Jack. She loved to sing while she was working. She sang her special Eskimo songs, the songs she'd made up. All the Eskimos made up songs, funny songs or sad or happy. "What's that song about?" asked Jack. Bo told him that Gintu's were all love songs. Said Jack, looking at Bo suspiciously. Bo knew that he was worried that Gintu's love songs might not be okay for a little girl to hear. Eskimos talked about everything. They didn't think there was anything they shouldn't talk about in front of children. The boys and the old-timers never talked about the things that the Eskimos talked about. When the table was finished, Bo took off her apron and put on Jack's big brown jersey gloves from the top of the wood box. It was her job every morning and night to bring the kindling and the wood to the big stove and stack it neatly in the wood box. Jack was the one who split the wood. Doing kitchen work, easy to get soft, he said. If I didn't split wood every day, that Swede would be able to beat me at arm wrestling. And that's not a thing I could put up with. Jack was very fussy about his wood. If you wanted a quick hot fire, like the kind you needed for biscuits or pie crust, that was birch, cut small. And for a slow fire you needed for beans or a moose roast, that was spruce. That's why the wood had to be carefully sorted, so he could put it in his hand on just what he needed. Jack always bragged that Bo was a good worker because she filled up every section of the wood box right to the top. Bo never does anything halfway, he said. If somebody praised you for doing a good job, you could never do it badly after that, which Bo thought was kind of hard when she was feeling lazy.